Welcome to the Sum of All Wisdom. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Cady. Thanks for joining us. Here we go. For 7 decades, Earl Okin has built one of the most remarkable careers in music. Singer, songwriter, guitarist, comedian, broadcaster, and master storyteller, one might say raconteur. He shared stages with Paul McCartney and Wings, Van Morrison, and generations of jazz greats while developing a singular voice rooted in jazz, bossa nova, and the great tradition of songwriting. In this conversation, Earl reflects on a lifetime of listening and creating and refining his craft, offering some hard-earned wisdom about originality and perseverance and why the greatest musicians never stop learning or listening. Good morning, Earl. Thanks for persevering and getting through our audio difficulties, but I'm glad to talk to you this morning. How are things? How are you doing?
Likewise. Well, it's actually 7 minutes past 4. I'm gradually waking up. Takes me a while, but I'm gradually becoming compos mentis.
Then you're a step ahead of me because I don't think I've ever been compos mentis, so it's good one of us is.
They sell it at the local store. Get your own.
We're going to air 3 songs of yours on this episode, Earl. One is Yesterday's Wine. The other's your Bossa Nova piece that you sent along. And what was the third?
I think I gave you one of my swingers. That's called London Now.
Tell me about these songs.
Well, they're good examples of the main genres in which I write. Yesterday's Wine is the one that people tend to like the most. People keep asking for it. And it's a sort of 60s pop ballad. I suppose it's the one that why people think that I sound a bit like McCartney, because he also wrote the odd ballad here or there, didn't he? So that's one. London Now is more like the sort of thing that Sinatra might have sung. Only instead of singing about New York or Chicago, mine's about London in terms of the lyric. And then what was the song? Oh, the other one's one of my bossa novas. It's one that I happen to like. It's called Time. And again, it has a lyric which is more like Brazilian lyrics, which tend to be more philosophical and maybe serious and dark than people think, because the people who wrote words for bossa novas tended to be poets rather than lyricists. So you have to write in a different way when you're writing for different types of songs. That's the way I work. But as I said, there's quite a few of all sorts of stuff on YouTube and also on Spotify, if you prefer that.
I long to be in London now, in London now, the autumn's hanging in the breeze. I long to hear on every bough starlings and sparrows sharing gossip in the trees. The riverside at eventide will glow and days done. The stars appear, the air is clear. Believe it, that fog's long gone from London. So I wish somehow to be in London now. And Paris chic is not my style. New York hangs is heavy in its hot and humid clime. I never sought a tropic isle. I'd soon get tired of sand and water all the time. I long to linger at the windows in the West End, while strolling to a rendezvous with someone who's much more than a best friend. So I wish and how I were in London
So let's do some background, Earl. Let's start with, I guess, basically a brief biography. How did you come into the world of music? Where were you born? When were you born? How long have you been doing this?
I was born in 1947. My parents noticed that I like music, and when I was 3, my father, instead of buying me a toy, he bought me something that nobody seemed to want anymore, so they were going cheap. A wind-up gramophone, something which is erroneously called a phonograph in America, because phonographs are really for cylinders. So he bought me a gramophone for half a crown, which works out in modern money at 12.5 pence, which is like nothing, like 20 cents American money. But in 1950, that was what things went for. And 6 78s. So the first things, apart from somebody upstairs, a Pakistani student that was staying with us, had a recording of a Puccini aria, which was the big thing, the way that Nessun Dorma has been a big thing recently. And I was transfixed by this melody, and I was like 2 or 3. And then we had the radio, we had pop songs of the day, but I listened to my 6 records, which included Jimmy Durante, Ruth Etting, and God knows what else. So it was just, any old records that happened to be on the stall that morning when my father bought it for me. And I started singing, and whatever I heard on the radio, I'd sing. And then at the local market, when I was 3, I started singing in a loud voice when I heard this tune coming out of a gramophone shop or something, and I earned 1 threepence, and my mother made me give it back. and the neighbor said, "Fool, take him back again, see what you can get." And I started singing all over the place, and by the time I was 12, I got to go on television. You had to be 12 in England at that time to be on television, and there was only one channel. It was the BBC, of course. So that's sort of how I kicked off. I've even got recordings of myself when I was 12. And then I, went to school, and then I started writing songs, and suddenly it was the 60s, and of course, the Beatles and everything else kicked in. I thought I can do that, and I started writing songs, and I met somebody who knew the Beatles publisher, who was called Dick James, and I was introduced to him. He's been very badly portrayed as a nasty person. He was wonderful. I liked him very much. We got on very well. I know he didn't get on well with Elton John later, but trust me, he was a really nice chap. And he had been a singer himself. And so I had my songs covered by people like Cilla Black. I don't know how well these people are known in America. Helen Shapiro, and Georgie Fame.
And Bing Crosby was supposed to cover one of your songs, but he died before he was able to.
That was much later. That was in the late 70s. and I met him at the Palladium, and after what turned out to be his very last show there, and it was agreed by, I don't know, I forgot. We had somebody who knew him and knew me, and they got my song to his ears, and he said yes, he'd like to record it. And we had a chat about Bix Beiderbecke, and then he went off at the end of his run there at the Palladium to play some golf. And a week later, he won a match, but dropped dead on the way back to the clubhouse. So that was the end of my chance of hearing my song sung by Bing Crosby. I've had a career like that, things going wrong.
Just at the wrong moments, right?
Yeah, bad timing.
Yeah.
Well, as you know, I did manage to go out on tour as a support act with people like, do you know Van Morrison? Is he known?
I've heard that name.
Yeah, Fairport Convention. And then, of course, the big one, which enabled me to give up my day job, which was by then deputy headmaster of a primary school. I went on tour in November 1979 with a band called Wings, run by somebody called Paul McCartney.
That name rings a bell too.
That was fun. So I was going on stage solo for half an hour before Wings came on.
That's a very different sound than the McCartney and Wings sound. How did they come to select you as their opener?
Well, I knew the drummer. Actually, I knew the guitarist as well, but I particularly had made friends with the drummer. In fact, we're still friends. I call him, and he lives in New York at the moment, although he's thinking of coming home to England. I think he's being put off by a certain Donald Trump. But he had heard me compare what was called a folk festival. In other words, I'd performed for 20,000 people, and I'd had to deal with an awkward thing that went wrong. And without going into details, it could easily have ended up with everybody throwing things at me. But I managed to get over it, and people listened to my set, and it all worked out. So he saw that I wasn't worried about potentially hostile large crowds. And they had been discussing having an opening act that wasn't the usual, young band or something. And they were talking about circus acts. I suppose they were thinking about Sergeant Pepper and things like that. And they were talking about stilt walkers, jugglers, and whatever. And whenever anybody suggested anything, went, no, that won't work. And anyway, my friend Steve Holly, the drummer, he suddenly said, I know somebody who could do it. And apparently, because I wasn't there, but as I understand it, Paul said, well, it's the first time anybody's been enthusiastic about anyone, so let's try him. So that's how it worked.
And how was that a European tour, a UK tour, a global tour? Where did you travel with
him? Just a UK tour. So he went all the way from the south coast to Scotland.
How many shows did you perform?
I'm trying to remember. I reckon it must have been about 15, 17, something of that nature. It's a long time ago now. And I elected with my late manager not to go on the tour bus with everybody, because otherwise I'd be stuck there, and we wanted to try and do some PR for me, So I had my car, which at that time, the starter wasn't working. So it was very funny. I got, one of the world's most famous musicians in the tour bus, but in front of it was my car. And it was a dreadful winter. You had sort of blizzards and awful. But nothing could happen until I got out, got the starting handle, and turned the engine over, and then my car would start, and finally everything could move. And Paul thought that was quite funny, actually. So we did. Yeah, and it's a really nice, relaxed tour. I remember the roadies had a nickname for the tour because they'd worked with everybody. And their nickname for this tour was Mum and Dad and the Kids Go on Holiday. And that's very much what it felt like. It was very relaxed. Nobody pulled rank on anybody. The band got fed last because they were the least important people. The important people were the people doing the lighting and sound.
That seems a little not what you would expect from a rock and roll tour, I think, for many people.
Well, you know, I wouldn't. I always called the Beatles and Wings a pop group rather than a rock band, and there's a certain difference, if you know what I mean.
Tell us what you mean,
Um,
Earl.
well, if you watch the famous comedy film, what was it called now? Where they make fun of the rock band and they sort of
Spinal Tap.
idiotic Spinal Tap. That's the one. You see what that's a rock band. A pop group tended to be people who cared about music more seriously. I mean, the guitarist Lawrence Juba, he had a sort of degree from the Royal Academy of Music. Um, Steve Holiday is an absolute world-class drummer. Of course, then you had, Paul and his wife. So that left one rock and roller in the band, and sadly, he's no longer with us. And he had been in another pop group before, and he was the only one who behaved like a rock and roller. In fact, one night he went off and chatted up a barmaid who wasn't there in the morning because he'd gone off with her. But the rest, everybody else was sort of, it was more like touring with a jazz quartet, if you know what I mean. People cared about the music rather than, having a rock and roll lifestyle.
Interesting. And when you toured with Van Morrison, similar conditions, or what was it like with him?
That was different. It was also, that was a bigger band. There was all sorts of people, one of whom was a female violinist who fancied herself, but upset the roadies who thought she had too much ego and stuff. And on the last night of the tour, they did horrible things to her. They gaffer taped her violin lead to the floor so she could hardly move when she played it, which was actually very funny. You have to watch out on the last night of tours because the roadies start doing things to the supporting band and or support act. I know that I ended up doing my set to a background. I didn't know this, but they were back projecting, without sound, of course, the last scene of I don't know, a cowboy film with Indians and cowboys being killed. It's all going on behind me in silence, and I wondered why the audience was reacting the way they were. But they quite liked me. That was quite a mild thing. I could do horrible things to you if they wanted to. And the trouble with the Van Morrison tour was that Van, at that time, at any rate, had found the strain of everything being on his shoulders really too much for him, and he would suddenly lose his temper and have a meltdown and start shouting and losing his temper. And then, of course, the next morning, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean any of that," So the roadies were always a little bit on edge, wondering what he was gonna do. But, it all went off. I had a much longer set to do with that one. I had to do about 45 minutes, and he only did about 50, so I was half the show on that one. So really, but it's great because it taught me what touring as a support act would be. And before that, I'd only done folk people like Ralph McTell. Your people won't know who he was, but who he is, I should say. But he had some hits here in England, and then a folk rock band called Fairport Convention. So I'd done those first, and then I did Van Morrison, and finally the Wings thing.
And before Fairport and Van and Wings, you've had one hell of a career, Earl. I mean, you've done a lot of things with a lot of people. You've innovated Bossa Nova. You've played all over the world. You've got songwriting chops. You've got comedy chops. There's a lot of things that you've done.
It all started in the 70s. There was something that people don't talk about anymore. They were called folk clubs, but they weren't really, in England at any rate, necessarily folk clubs. They really were acoustic music clubs. There's places where you could play if you didn't have a band, basically. And there were people called traddies, in other words, the ones who really did folk music from, rural parts of England with an accent that nobody could understand, things like that. And then there were people known as the entertainers. And those people could be doing old music hall vaudeville songs. They could be people who were very funny when they spoke in between songs. They could be doing jazz standards. They could be doing any old thing. Um, the only thing they had in common was that they were acoustic. And that's why we played at folk clubs. And I learned a lot about performing to an audience. When that whole thing died, and it suddenly died around 1980, 81, I somehow got invited into a whole different thing, often at the same, very same venues, but it was known as new comedy. And I've been a headline comedian on that circuit for 40 years. So I went from one to the other, literally, a week later. But around that time, because of the Wings tour, I started getting one or two guest spots on major TV talk shows. The equivalent of, Johnny Carson in America. We had Michael Parkinson here, Gabe Byrne in Ireland, and I did one in Brazil, and I did several in Australia. So I did a few of those, and that was in the 80s and 90s. And then, doing gigs and gradually, hopefully getting better. And always writing songs, but in various genres, what I call proper songs, as opposed to, I want to talk about my girlfriend or my boyfriend and moan about them, and I've put it, I made up the words and then I put any old tune to it, and that's a song. That's not, to me, what songwriting is. You start off with the music. You start off with the genre. You say, is it going to be a waltz or a bossa nova or a rock song or Tamla Motown type thing, or am I going to try and write one like George Gershwin? And so you've decided that. Then you start playing the piano or the guitar, and you play a series of chords. And if you're wise, you'll try not to write a series of cliche chord sequences, because the more unusual the chords sequences, don't have to be complicated chords, but they've got to sort of be in the wrong order, if you know what I mean. And that leads the melody to go around strange corners, and that's how you write original melodies. It doesn't always work. You could go for 2 or 3 days and nothing comes, and then all of a sudden something appears. And I always compare it to imagine you're at some sort of gold mine and you're watching a conveyor belt and it's full of earth that's been dug up, and you keep looking at it and it's just rubbish, earth. And all of a sudden you see a little bit of gold gleaming, and your job is to take that bit of gold off the conveyor belt before it goes into the bucket, and then you polish it and then you play with it and it becomes something lovely. That's sort of what you do. You're playing, just a lot of cliches come out of your mouth and no tune, and then all of a sudden, bit of tune, you think, oh, that's different. So you take it off, and then you sort of polish it with what sort of craft you've learnt over the years, so that it makes sense and it's got a form, and then there's a middle eight that goes with it, and however it is, until you've got it right. And then that's the song. And then in my case, then you think, right. And sometimes while I'm doing it, I just mouth completely meaningless words, but which sound right with those notes. And sometimes just that odd word, which you didn't even know why you said it, that becomes, okay, that's what the song's going to be about now. And that's how I write songs. Unless they're supposed to be funny ones, then that's different. Then you start off by saying, right, what am I trying to do which is going to make people laugh? And then the melody doesn't really have to be so original. But that's really what I do when I write songs.
How did you learn that process? How did that come to you?
I don't know. I think I just found it. I was doing it anyway, and then you think, oh, that's what I'm doing. You suddenly start. What I used to do, I start at the piano, and I'd be playing a rhythm, and after a while, you start actually analyzing what you're doing. At first, you just do it by instinct. I'm not sure that I didn't write better songs by instinct than when I started actually thinking about it.
Mm.
But I've got songs going back to the 60s. I first recorded, thanks to Dick James, at the famous Abbey Road Studios in 1967. It would have been about 3 or 4 months after the Beatles had finished their Sergeant Pepper LP in that studio, same studio. And that would have been the time when I was there. Um, so, and that's, I mean, it's on YouTube. It's a song called Yellow Petals.
Mm.
So you can hear it anytime you want. That's me when I was 20 years old. Frightening.
So how you were, back up a little bit, Earl. First gramophone when you were
3. Yes.
When did the piano and the guitar come in for you?
Well, we were living in a place with a beat up upright, which wasn't really in tune, but it was, it's a piano. And I did take about 10 lessons, but I didn't practice. The only thing I once did when I was about 8, I'd started collecting 78s. That's what became before vinyl, for those people who don't know. Around the time I was 6, because I heard this stuff called opera, and I fell in love with people like Caruso and Puccini and Shalyapin and all those people. And I used to get up at 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning and run down Portobello Road Market. There were other grown-up collectors who had more money than me, but I was faster than they were, so I got to the pile of records first. And for then, literally sixpence, which is, it sounds silly, it's 2.5 pence. That means, what does that work out at? Something like 4 cents. You could buy a record, you see. And I started collecting these things, and I started listening to them, and the only non-opera singer that I really liked was called Paul Robeson. And I actually got to hear him when he was given his passport back, because it was in the McCarthy era. He was given his passport back, and the first place he came was England, where he was loved, adored, and worshipped. And we got to the last tickets available for him at the Royal Albert Hall, and I sat behind his right shoulder and watched the very first concert I ever saw when I was 9 years old. And then I went to see Jussi Björling, the last of the great tenors, and a great guitarist called Segovia. This is all before I'm 10 or 11. So that's what I listened to. And then, of course, when I was about 12, there was this thing called jazz, which I discovered because people at my grammar school had been buying these cheap LPs that had come out, which were actually 1920s and 30s 78s, which they'd put on an LP. And they were about £1 each, as opposed to the posh LPs, proper ones, which cost £2. But they had Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, Django Reinhardt, you name it, Red Nichols. So I was listening to all this stuff. That was all new to me. And then, of course, I discovered the wonderful singer called Peggy Lee. And she became a great influence on how I sing to this day. You can't tell because we have certain gender differences, but she was probably a bigger influence on me than any other popular singer.
What was it about Peggy Lee that mesmerized you?
Phrasing, the way she used her voice, caressing the notes. It's difficult to put into words, but she didn't shout top notes. It wasn't that sort of singing. It was just subtle. And she found a way of dealing with all sorts of different genres of music. She could sing pop songs. She could sing Bossa Nova, the only American who phrased Bossa Nova right at all. Of course, the Great American Songbook, your Irving Berlin's and Cole Porter's and George Gershwin. She did all that. And it was, it was, how can I put it? It was a masterclass in how to phrase that sort of music. And of course, I also heard live in the 60s people like Ella Fitzgerald, Duke Ellington, and then later on, I actually got to meet some of my jazz heroes in the 70s, became friends with the great Benny Carter. He was really one of the greats. I got to sing with him, and I met the great bass player. The night I saw Bing Crosby, I got to be friends with this bass player that night who played with everybody, Milt Hinton. Then we became friends, and I went to his house in New York. So, I was basically a sort of jazz groupie. But I got to sing with some of them.
Earl Hines, I think I recall hearing about.
I met Earl Hines, yes. I didn't become friends with him, but I heard him at least twice.
Cleo Lane and Adelaide Hall.
Well, Addie was a friend. Adelaide was a generation before Ella and Billie Holiday. She was the very first. She used to lie about her age, but we discovered that she was born in 1901. And she died in 1993, and she was singing past her 90th birthday. And she was like 85, but behaved like a 13-year-old. She was a giggler. And she was a lovely singer. And she recorded with Duke Ellington in 1927, first of all. And on the label of the record, her name is in bigger letters than his because she was a huge star at that time. And in fact, she was invited to play at the London Palladium 2 years before Duke was, because she was a huge star at that 1929, 30, that sort of period. And she ended up marrying a West Indian and thus in those days becoming British. And she moved here in 1938 or so, and then she never went back to New York. And so I got to know her. She was lovely. Our other big name singer, I don't know how well you know, but huge. Her name was Cleo Lane. And she only died or less than a year ago. She was 97. And I sang at her 90th birthday concert when she still had a range of 4 octaves, which is ridiculous. Nobody's supposed to have 4 octaves.
Right.
I mean, I've got 2, and I'm quite pleased with that,
And you have retained your range. Your voice sounds remarkably like it did when you were a much younger man.
Yes, it hasn't changed at all. Well, there's 2 reasons. I've never smoked. And I don't really like alcohol. I mean, if I drink more than 6 of something per year, it's not that I'm actively anti it. It's just it doesn't really enter my head to have some. If I'm at a wedding or something, or if I'm abroad, there's some strange drink, I'll try it, but that'll be it. And then maybe 6 months later, I'll have another one. So I haven't had that, or certainly not smoking, to affect my singing. Plus, mine isn't the sort of singing where I force it in any way. It's quite soft singing by comparison. I've got a bigger voice than I actually use, to be honest. I could sing in a more of an operatic way and produce a lot more volume, but it's not the way you sing jazz, is it? So, I'm not pushing it. I'm not straining it in any way.
You just came back from a tour in Ireland, the west of Ireland. Tell us how the tour went, Earl.
Yes, I was there, and apart from the airport, which I hate airports. It was a lovely week. I was pampered and spoiled, and I was driven everywhere, and I had packed out audiences and standing ovations. It was very good for the ego.
That's impressive and fun. I expect.
I didn't think I was that good, actually. I thought I made a couple of mistakes. Nobody else seemed to care, but they probably didn't even notice. But I noticed. Thing is, I'm only happy with 1 in 20 shows that I do. Never mind if the audience thinks I'm all right. I've got to please me as well.
Right.
And I'm the most vicious critic I've got. If I sang 1 note wrong in the 15th song, that's all I remember. Do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean.
All the bits I got right, I don't care about that.
A little bit of
Bits I got wrong, but
perfectionism there.
yeah, well, you have to be. Otherwise, you're not going to improve, are you?
That's right.
So I'm sure. I mean, all the really greats. I'm not saying I'm one of the greats, but I mean, you read about how finicky Fred Astaire was about his dancing routines, and he said, looking back at his film things, he goes, "Oh my God, look at that!" And nobody else notices anything wrong. And he goes, "Oh, I should have done that turn better or that whatever." Nobody else knows, but he does, and that's the way things should be. I think, if you're going to be any good.
And tell us, Earl, when did you pick up the guitar? How did that come along in your life?
Well, my father played a 4-string guitar, and he played a few chords, and he'd had this since World War II because he ran a variety show during World War II. He was in the RAF. In the daytime, he taught people how to mend aeroplane engines, and in the evening, he ran variety shows and occasionally produced and directed drama as well. Because he was only in his 20s then. One forgets one's father was once younger.
Right.
Anyway, he had this guitar, and I picked it up and was messing about. And he had decided, he taught woodwork at school. He was a schoolmaster, and he had decided that instead of in woodwork classes teaching the kids or teenagers to make, I don't know, an egg rack or something really useless, he thought, right, why don't I design something out of plywood that they can make their own guitar? So while doing this, he made me a scaled down one with 6 strings, but small size. And he showed me a few basic chords. And he must have started like that. Because until then, when I sang in public, he would play the guitar for me. And then I was about, I don't know, 5 or 6, and I started playing a few chords. And then he made another one which was more full size, and it had 2 cutaways, so it looked like it had horns. And in fact, he called it the Viking. I have a picture of myself on TV when I was 12, and I'm playing that guitar. And it had steel strings. But soon after that, I found the nylon string guitar was better for the sort of music that I wanted to play. And I started, I've never gone back to a steel string guitar. I find it suits me better. And especially when I started singing Bossa Nova. But what I did over the years, just like the piano, it's all self-taught. And I'll never be a great guitarist or pianist, but it's very useful to have these under your fingers when you're writing a song. So I regard myself as a pretty good singer and a pretty good songwriter, but I know what real pianists and guitarists sound like, and I'm certainly not among them. I mean, I play well enough that I don't embarrass myself in front of real musicians, but I don't kid myself.
My muscle memory sort of fails me. My fingers never remember where to go. Just all over the strings. I can get in the neighborhood, but I never quite get the right address.
There you go. So are you mainly guitar or mainly piano?
I am learning the violin, to be honest, Earl, and it's
Violin.
Diabolical instrument.
Oh, yes.
But
I have a story about that.
Yeah, tell me.
A friend of mine was a good, solid, professional session violinist, and he was Jewish. And he was at the Royal Albert Hall for a concert because Yasha Heifetz was playing, and he was the violinist.
Right.
And when my friend looked to his right, there was an empty seat next to him, and then after that, he looked at that face. He thought, I know that face. And he was a very, very famous Russian violinist, David Oistrakh. He was in the audience. And anyway, he didn't speak any Russian, my friend, and Oistrakh didn't speak any English, but they both spoke Yiddish.
Oh,
so every now and then, they said something to each other, you see, but so also I said, for God's sake, keep it quiet. I don't want to be a disturbance in the audience here. And at one point during the concert, Jascha Heifetz had played something or other, and David Oistrakh leant over and said, "I wish I could play like that."
It's a good story, Earl.
I like that story.
I like it too.
Yes. Yeah. It shows you what real musicians are never satisfied with themselves.
That's right.
They always think, "Oh, if only I could be better." I wonder if Art Tatum felt like that. I can't imagine there's anything more he could have done. But I suppose,
all the greats probably feel that way.
I know Oscar Peterson said he'd never be able to play like Art Tatum. So, there's always, everybody thinks there's something they could do better.
That's right.
That they're not doing.
It's good for the soul, I think, to keep striving.
Absolutely. And then, of course, there's the other. There's two things. Obviously, there's one thing is, to get better. But the other thing, which is probably more difficult, at least if you want to get better, you practice, and things. But the other thing is to get well known and to get appreciated. That you need to be really a good businessman, which is what I'm not, which is why I'm still not well known. I hear people, I won't name names, but there's some famous people, and I think, goodness sake, I'm better than they are. Why am I not getting booked instead of them? But, it's all down to who you know, who your agent is, if you've got one, who your manager is, all that sort of stuff. And the other thing is that, of course, there's a tremendous amount of ageism. If you look online, everybody talks about emerging talent and up and coming this. You get past 30, if you haven't made it by then, you're already on a downward slope. It's and once you pass 50, and good luck to you.
Do you have an agent of your own?
No, I wish I did. If anybody listens to this and listens to my music and likes anything they hear, do please get in touch with me. The other thing, as you may or may not know, because you're in the USA, quite a few, like at least 3 or 4, I can think of venues. I'm talking about the jazz and the cabaret world now. Quite a few of them will fly people over from New York or wherever to play here, but nobody reciprocates. Nobody in America flies British people over there. Okay, in the 1960s with Beatles and the English thing, yes, that was fine for about 3 years. But in the world of jazz and classic songs, it just doesn't happen. Yes, I can work it all over Europe. Somebody's just asking me about possibility of Sweden and Norway coming up. There's somebody else I found in Italy. I don't know. I'm looking at these places, and Germany. I can work there, or certainly in Belgium and Holland. But when it comes to America, definitely not. I actually used to have. Well, I've got an expired O1 visa in one of my old passports. And O1 is the visa you get if you are genuinely a celebrity, like Paul McCartney will have an O1. I've got one. How I got it is a long story and it involved Milt Hinton, but I got one for a while. But it's expired now. In order to get it reinstated, it would cost me $4,000. So I'm not going to do that unless I've got a lot of work to go over for. And you ring them up and they go, "Do you have a big following over here?" And you go, "Well, I can't really have a good big following if you don't let me perform there." And so it's like a sort of a catch-22.
All about the metrics. Tell us the story, Earl, about the O1 visa. You've played in the U.S. How did that go? When was that? What was Milt's role in bringing you over here?
Oh, no, he didn't bring me over, but I met him while I was there. And when you apply for this visa, he wrote a sort of citation about how wonderful I was. And I don't know, it was very nice of him. I first went over there properly I'd had I did go over in the end of my degree, 68, but I didn't really enjoy it that. America was New York, I should say, was a violent city at that time, and I had some nice moments while I was there. I sang at a place called Categorizing Star, but I wasn't there long enough to do anything about that. But in the 70s, I met a lady who knew all the greats of yesteryear. She was friends with Duke Ellington, and she was friends with, I don't know, Dizzy Gillespie and Benny Carter and all that stuff. She said, "Come over when I go over and I'll introduce you to all these people." And that's how I met Benny Carter over there. And around the same time, I made various contacts about performing, and I got to perform in LA somewhere. So that went very well. Um, Sometimes the comedy is more difficult because in England we're used to irony and not saying what you really mean, and everybody gets it immediately. Whereas over there, and they don't get it at all. I have a habit when I'm doing a comedy show of being introduced as musical genius and sex symbol, right? Um, and I remember I was doing a gig once in Bermuda, but with a audience that was mainly came off cruise ships from New Jersey, as I remember. And that's how I was the show finished, I happened to be near the door, and there was a middle-aged couple, and I heard one say to the other, to his wife, that's right, a man say, says, I don't know why you thought he was so sexy." Completely missing the whole joke. So, you have to watch out for that in America. They don't sometimes realize that you're being silly and, they think you mean what you say.
That's quite
But,
literal.
apart
Yeah.
from that, yes, he was I don't know why he thought he was so sexy. I'll never forget that. But other times, I've had lovely experiences. There's a place in New York where, jazz singers and, um, people from musical theater sing songs, and I remember doing that once, and they had a rule that everybody only had one song, each you see, to sing. But the audience went so mental that he had to give me a second one, so that I felt pretty good about that. So listen, we all have our good nights and our disasters, obviously.
This is
So,
true.
you remember the nice ones.
And where did Bossa Nova come in for you, Earl? You're quite the Bossa Nova raconteur, I
Yes,
understand.
well, that started off with Peggy Lee. She sang this song called Quiet Nights, which is in Portuguese called Corcovado, and I really liked that. And then I met someone in London who was Brazilian, and I was trying to sing it, and I now realize how I had no idea what to do with my right hand when playing the guitar, and it was all completely wrong. And I met two people who showed me what I should be doing, and as soon as I got that, I then gradually understood what I should do. But even before that, when I was still working with Dick James, I wrote two attempts at a bossa nova. And of course, he got top musicians in to do demos. So I've got recordings of me singing my very first attempt. One was called Adriana, another one's called Billy. And I've now written, I suppose, about 20 bossa novas. But gradually, I started listening to Brazilian people. And of course, the person who inspired me the most is a guy called João Gilberto. João Gilberto actually, literally himself, invented bossa nova. What he basically did was to take samba, which everybody did in Brazil, but he'd heard a recording of some cool jazz with a guitarist called Barney Kessel playing. The funny thing is, I worked with Barney Kessel once, and he had no idea how to play bossa nova. It wasn't his thing. But João Gilberto had heard the chords he was playing, and he said to himself, what would happen if I put these jazz chords to a sort of gentle form of samba with a nylon string guitar? And he was faffing about with things. And it became that we call it Bossa Nova. He wasn't really a songwriter, but he got a deal with a small label in Rio de Janeiro, and there's a young man there who was the musical director, and he did write songs, and he said, I like what you're doing, maybe I can write songs for you in that style. And his name was Antonio Carlos Jobim, and the rest, as they say, is history. He wrote Corcovado, he wrote The Girl from Ipanema, he wrote, it's hardly a song that he wrote which wasn't a great song. I got to meet him, and it was very nice.
Astrid Gilberto was the one who made Ipanema famous.
Right. Well, Astrid was his wife, and she was really just an amateur singer that sort of sang in the kitchen. The difference was that she could sing in English. And she also, good looking in a sort of doll-like sort of way. So that was a good combination. You had this very attractive looking girl singing the Bossa Nova in English. If you listen to the Gets Gilberto record, he sings it first, but in Portuguese. That didn't catch, but somebody singing in English, of course, in America, that was much more important. And that's really and of course, the saxophone player with them, Stan Getz, that combination became a massive hit. Somebody once said it's the third most successful song of all time. What the other two are, I don't know, but somebody said that to me once. I don't know whether it's true, but it started off with that. But I'm not a statistician. I don't really know the answer.
And our lives are full of hopes and dreams. All our plans and all our tiny schemes. Will they rise or sink below? Only time will let us know. And our lives are made of hopes and fears. Seeking joy but only finding tears. When we're blind and cannot see, only time can set us free. Time's our piper who plays. We know who pays the bill. Time will still wear the crown as days count down to nil. Yet we still hope all our dreams come true. When it comes to love, I dream of you. Am I reaching for a star? Only time will say how far. Only time will say how far.
You mentioned Barney Kessel. He was quite an interesting guitar player as well. He had known for his style, but he didn't ever want to vary that style. And I think you had some words for him about that.
Well, I met him. I was sort of a support act at a jazz club for 2 weeks, and I once asked him during the week. I said, "What about the pre-war sort of white guitarists who played chord solos? Did you ever play that sort of stuff?" He went, "Sure." She said, "I grew up with that. That's how I started." I said, "Oh, really?" And he then picked up the guitar. He was off stage. It was the end of the evening, and he played a wonderful, typical solo of the sort that they did in the 30s. I said, "Why don't you do that as part of your show?" He said, "Well, I'm not known for that." I said, "Exactly. I don't mean do the whole show, but put one in, and people blow their minds that you can do that as well."
Mm.
And he didn't want to. I don't know why not. But the next night, I after the show, I said, "I really enjoyed that last. Would you do that another one for me tonight?" Only this time I had my cassette recorder with me. So somewhere in one drawer or other, I've got Barney Kessel playing in the style of the 30s great guitarists that there were. And he could do it all. And I think he also occasionally appeared on pop records playing whatever was. I mean, he was apart from being a star, I think he was also worked as a session musician as well.
Mm-hmm.
But the funny thing, the one thing he didn't play was bossa nova. Not once.
Any idea why?
Maybe he'd never really gone into it, I suppose. I mean, it's a whole different. It's like being a classical guitarist, not playing jazz. It's a different. All the phrasing's different and everything's different. The chords are the same, but everything else isn't. So that's why so few American singers, even Ella, Frank Sinatra, whoever, Sarah Vaughan, they all try and sing bossa nova, but they don't listen to the Brazilians, and so they don't sing it right. Because in jazz you phrase a bit after the beat, and in bossa nova you phrase before the beat.
You said, Earl, earlier that it's the right hand was your downfall with learning the bossa nova. Tell me what happens with the right hand that's different from jazz playing, for instance.
I was playing a rhythm that was more like a calypso, really. It was a rhythm that I know my father used to play with a sort of a finger and thumb, which it's difficult to describe in words, but it comes out as a bossa nova. And it's sort of a smooth thing where you just go up and down, whereas bossa nova you sort of pluck at it at certain times. Dun 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 dun, that sort of rhythm. And and I was going da ba 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 da. This is the wrong rhythm. And so I gradually learnt from my friends what I should do.
I mean, your vocalization of it sounds exactly right, and I could hear ta da 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 ta da ta 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 da da ta, right? Ipanema.
Well, that's the tune.
Yeah,
but the rhythm goes dum 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 dum. What you got to hear in your head is eight beats to the bar, and then you accentuate certain ones in that 8. That's basically what it is. As I said, the best thing is it's all on YouTube now. Go and look at João Gilberto and watch his fingers and what he's doing, and you'll see how it's done.
So you were writing bossa nova for Dick James when you met him, and there's a story there.
He was my publisher. I've got, I think about 10, 12 demos that he did of my songs. And of them, I would think 2 of them were bossa novas. The others were, pop songs and pop ballads, 1 or 2 up tempos as well. But, amongst the stuff, this was the 60s. So, and I suppose to this day, when I write a pop song, it still sounds like it was written in the 60s because that's where I come from. he used to call me his second Paul McCartney, and I used to say, "I'm not your second Paul McCartney. I'm your first Earl Okin." And he'd always laugh, you see. It was one sort of standing joke between us. Um, and But we got on very well, and he seemed to like what I had to offer. But unfortunately, I was stupid enough to want to finish my degree, and I wasn't around when he formed a record company. And so instead, he pushed the other person he had on his list, who was called Reg Dwight. And he decided that wasn't a very commercial name, and he changed it to Elton John.
You were right there on that cusp. You have regrets about that?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. What am I going to do with a degree in philosophy? It's done nothing for me whatsoever. All it does is get me into stupid arguments with people who don't understand what I'm saying anyway. So I would have been much better off getting a career in music.
What's the next step for you, Earl? What's ahead this summer?
You may have heard of a gentleman called George Gershwin. And he was, of course, Jewish, but he wrote a musical, which was an all-black musical called Porgy and Bess.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, right, okay, I'm going to write the sequel. So I have done, and it's got some really good songs in it. But who do I contact to get it put on? I know nothing about the world of musicals. You need contact, so that's one thing. Then I decided to write a symphony, which I've also done. I don't know what to do with that either. I mean, I know pretty little about how to get ordinary songs put on, but I know nothing about those things. I can do the music bit, but the contacts. So if amongst your listeners you've got any people who are managers, bookers of festivals, agents, anybody, please give them my email address, because I'm not a businessman. I'm a musician, and you need somebody who can do that. So, and you need somebody who contacts as well.
Right.
These days, unless they know who you are or they know your agent, you send them an email and they don't even reply. It goes straight in the bin.
The era of your time with Dick James, there were A&R guys who would just sit at a desk and you could bring in a demo tape and they would listen to it with you and then say no. But still, you got the chance. That's not the way it is.
With him, it was even better. He had a piano in the office. So I came and did it in person.
Right. You've also written your autobiography, Earl.
Yes, I have.
Tell me, it's a good piece of writing, by the way, if I could say so.
Thank you.
And tell me your perspective on it.
Well, as you know, if you've read some of it, I don't appear till about page 60 or something. I lost my mother when I was 60 and she was almost 95, and I suddenly realized that nobody could meet my grandparents or my parents anymore. So I started, partly as a sort of way of dealing with the loss of my mother, I started writing all the stories that I'd been told by, various generations of my forebears. And then, of course, I get to 1947 and I appear, and then I sort of went on, and while I could remember everything, I started writing stories. I mainly tried to write stories where, although it's roughly in order of my life, it tends to be full of anecdotes. And when I was writing it, to make it better writing, I thought anyway, my method was try and keep the chapters short so that you could read it on a train and then get off at the next station, but you'd read 2 pages, which was one chapter. I would read it out aloud. If you've written it properly, it just sounds like somebody's talking to you, which is what I think this sort of writing should sound like. That's my approach anyway.
For sure, Earl. And good luck both with agenting and sort of finding new gigs and publishing the manuscript as well.
If you're coming to London, do let me know.
I will, absolutely. I'd love to see you perform live, Earl. I think I've seen lots of the video, but I want to see it up close and in person, as they say.
Nice. You want the full horror of it all.
I want the
Yes,
full
fine.
musical genius and sex symbol treatment, naturally.
Thank you.
I want to thank you very much for joining me today, Earl. This has been a really wonderful conversation. I'm so happy that we finally got our technology problems worked out and we're able to get this together. So
Yes.
Thanks a million for getting
Sorry
up
about
and
that.
joining us.
I'm not very good with technology.
It's not you. That's definitely not blaming you. I had my own problems on this end, so I'm just glad we got it worked out.
I'm ready for world fame and legendhood as a direct result of it.
Excellent. We'll see what we can do. All right. Take care, Earl. It's great to talk to you today. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
You're drinking yesterday's wine. You know that wine won't last too long. Stretch out a hand. We'll pour a new glass now. You're reading yesterday's news. You're gonna lose your grip on life. Stretch out a hand. We'll turn a new page now. Draw the cork. Raise your glass. See the bubbles rise and shine, and I'll look in your eyes, and you in mine. Don't dream of yesterday's love. Yesterday's love could come again. Stretch out a hand. I know it's hard to do, for I've been drinking yesterday's wine too. Draw the cork, raise your glass. See the bubbles rise and shine, and I'll look in your eyes, and you in mine. Don't dream of yesterday's love. Yesterday's love could come again. Stretch out a hand. I know it's hard to do, for I've been drinking yesterday's wine. For I've been drinking yesterday's wine. Yes, I've been drinking yesterday's wine too.
And thank you for listening. If today's conversation resonated with you, I'd invite you to continue exploring it. Visit thesumofallwisdom.com for show notes, essays, transcripts, field notes, and our listening rooms, where each conversation becomes part of a larger archive of musical craft and creative wisdom. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, following the show, leaving a review, or sharing it with someone who loves music and the people who make it. And check out our Patreon site where you can help ensure that the sum of all wisdom is able to continue and flourish. For now, I'm Scott Cady. Remember to stay curious, listen deeply, and keep cultivating your perception. See you next time.